Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Commander Bear, and today I'm going to talk to you about some of the things I use and implement in my SQUAD SDK artworks to make them work better, to make them pop more, and generally make them more comfortable for the eye and really tell a story in a, I guess, broader horizon, utilizing some of the most common and basic rules that I've learned both in university and both before that about basically composition, eye catchers, rule of thirds, contrast, all of those, I'd say, bombastic terms I'm going to explain today, and I'll show you how I incorporate them into my artworks to make them work as best as possible. And I will also show you some of my worst designs um, to just try to show you to make you understand why those rules are so important and why following them will yield better results than whatever you're going to see in some of the artworks I'm going to show you. I'll also show you some of them that the rules I'm going to talk about today are, I guess, coming into play greatly and are working fine. So, what is a composition? We're going to talk about composition. I'm going to say it a lot in this little guide. So, basically, a composition is the definition of it is an act of putting something together. It can be one thing and another, can be five things and one thing, can be a lot of things, but it's putting them together in a combinations of elements, qualities. For example, like a flower arrangement is a composition. You put one and two together and it forms three. And basically what you see in front of your eyes right now, some of my artworks, they utilize the compositions. Don't worry, I'll tell you if some of them are bad. There's going to be a little bit of I guess, an icon or something that says next to them that this is not following the rules that I'm about to talk to you about. And I hope you'll enjoy this guide. Take everything with a grain of salt. Again, I am not a professor of any sort. This is some of the things that I myself implement into my designs. Some will say they're good, some will say they're bad. I would really recommend you that if you have more time, that you will open up YouTube, search composition for dummies, for example, to get the broader horizon of what truly is a composition, the types of them, because I'm going to talk about some very basic terms, but some of them are really critical to understand. Even if the most basic meaning of them, you can create some of the best artworks you've created so far. So let's jump right into it. So the first thing we're going to talk about is going to be eye catchers. So an eye catcher is the first thing that I take into account whenever I try to make a new artwork, new composition. I try to find the best eye catcher I can possibly get. As you can see on your screen right now, I'm going to show you a few artworks that have one distinctive eye catcher that holds its own above every other element in that picture. It can be due to the transparency of the background, can be due to how it corresponds with the different elements that are going to be in the composition. We're going to talk about all of it, but the first thing I'd like to really tell you is choose that one eye catcher. Whenever you choose that eye catcher, you will be able to build a composition around it. It's always the first element that you're going to add into the composition. It's going to be the one that will deliver the message that you want to deliver whenever you're making an artwork. If you want the guy to be strong, if you want it to be, I don't know, if you want him to convey a certain emotion, the eye catcher is going to be your main part of that composition, and this is what's going to really show the viewers what you want to present them with. I'm going to talk about, in this tutorial obviously, I'm going to talk about the different types of eye catchers, how they correspond with everything, with colors, with composition, with a contrast, which I'm going to talk about as well. We're going to talk about the rule of thirds, golden ratio, a lot of things we're going to talk about in this tutorial. I'm going to make it as short as possible. Um, and that is pretty much it. So the first rule, really, the first thing I can tell you, pick up an eye catcher, pick up the main part of the composition, and build the composition around it. It doesn't matter um, how the character itself looks or whatever. You can control the scene. You can control where you put the camera, where you put the rest of the items that are going to be corresponding with him in the composition, and you can make the shape the world really in terms of how the world reacts to that character. So I'd say if you start from there and you build a world around it, that's how you're going to start creating something that's grand, that's good, that's going to help you create a better composition, a better artwork to look at, that's going to be comfortable for the eye and convey the message that you're trying to convey. Okay, so jumping into the actual world of composition, we're going to talk about the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds is a grid that has been proven to produce some great artworks if you're going to create them in relation to that rule of thirds, that grid. It's basically 3 columns divided by 3 other columns, that in each one there's one distinctive point of contact. There's going to be 4 of them in the composition, that if you place your characters according to those lines, to those grid, if they're going to correspond with that grid, I assure you that your artworks might go out the way you want them to go out. They will be praised, and pretty much if you take into account the rule of thirds, that grid, if you place it onto every artwork you really make, it's going to help you serve the purpose of creating a good composition, a correct composition. I'm going to show you how a rule of thirds doesn't really work. If you look in front of you, if you look at that artwork, the rule of thirds here doesn't work at all because everything is messy. It doesn't correspond with each one of those thirds. Everything is kind of invading each other thirds, if you can see what I mean in that composition. And I think this is one I made, by the way. I think it's just really, really bad. It doesn't work as well. And I'm going to show you one that actually works really well with the rule of thirds. And a lot of my artworks, with noticing and without noticing, work with them. Maybe it's because, I've been regulating myself to look at a composition and think, okay, this rule of thirds works. So I would say if you want to make your artworks pop up and you want to make them work well, to make the eye feel more comfortable looking at them, the rule of thirds is definitely something you need to take into account. If you ever use the digital camera, there is literally a grid like that, the rule of thirds. Which is embedded onto the camera screen, which, if you take a picture, you will see that those grid lines are going to be above that picture, and it's going to show you, it's going to guide you really into taking a really good picture. So this works the same in the editor. You're just going to either create one of those masks. I would really suggest you download a PNG of I'm just gonna link it to you, the PNG of that rule of thirds. You're gonna import it into the Epic editor, and I think I might show you it at the end of the tutorial as well. And you will be able to put it on top of your camera as some sort of a mask, so you can actually position your characters according to those thirds, and everything will just look grand, really. Everything will work together smoothly. So that is really the rule of thirds. The correspondence with each of those 4 corners and the correspondence between the parts of those thirds is just, it's just the way to go. It's just the way it works. The reason for it is really, if you have one side that is really cluttered with information and the other one is, really not, you're going to shift the composition into a way of showing either there's a lot of clutterness in one side, in one small side, and then there's a lot of emptiness in the other. If you make them work correctly, then it will just look grand. Like as you can see in the following pictures I'm showing you on the screen right now. I think I showed you them before. Um, this is a good way to create good artworks. Good composition is the rule of thirds. I will show you at the end of the tutorial how to pretty apply the mask itself onto the SDK. Next thing that I'm going to talk about is going to be contrast. And contrast is really, if you don't know the term, contrast is pretty much the relationship between something and I would say the opposite of it, in a way that could bring your character, the eye catcher that you put into the scene, into the light more, in terms of viewability, in terms of visibility. So for example, if I'll take the colors black and white, if I'm going to put a black figure uh, um, on a white background, the black figure is going to pop out greatly. The same applies for if I put a black background and a white figure. It applies the same, really. So it's all about the contrast between either background, other characters, and the main eye catcher that you want to put out in a light that's going to be a lot brighter than the rest of the composition. This is all tied to hierarchy, which I'm going to talk about as well. Hierarchy is one of the main fundamental things about an eye catcher. But when it comes to contrast, a lot of the things that can affect contrast is going to be color, which is one of the main things that affect it. So for example, if you've seen the artworks in front of you, this is very much on the edge of what is good and bad contrast, because as you can see, the character is really corresponding well with the colors that are in the background. They're basically the same colors, the helicopter color, the two characters at the background, but the only thing I really changed is going to be the visibility. So if I'm changing the visibility of the background in an area where the colors are practically the same, so the main character, my eye catcher, has the same colors as the environment, is going to look absolutely terrible. But here, what I've done is pretty much blurred the background to make our focus fall directly on that main character, on that eye catcher. Now, some of you may say this might be a little bit too much on the line, or this may not be a good artwork. I think it works good. The visibility here is not the best for the eye catcher itself, but still, I think there is enough, just barely enough contrast to show us the difference between that pilot that stands there and points at the helicopter to the people in the background, to show you that the main show is pretty much that character. So contrast works on colors. So if you have matching colors together with the background and the eye catcher itself, it's just not going to work that well unless you're going to edit them and make them appear less visible, or darker, or maybe even whiter. Depends on what's the eye catcher color or temperature is, and pretty much the environment when it comes to contrast. So I'm going to switch artwork and show you this hell of a mess of an artwork. You have so many colors, you have so many contrasts going on together, you just can't find, there's so many problems that happen with this artwork. You can't just find one eye catcher, and this is due to the attempt of trying to create a lot of contrast between different areas of the map. When I say map artwork itself, I have colors assault my eyes, and the first place I really take my eyes to is the darkness, the background, because it isn't assaulting my eyes as much. This is the contrast. So it works both ways. So if you have something that is just too much, for example, like a background that is too white, and then you have a black figure at the at the front, like in this artwork in front of you, you pretty much get drawn to the thing that is the most special in that composition. That is the least popular compositions. So here you can see I have this entire white, I would say floor, white theme, everything. Then there's this character standing on the right side. The reason I blurred the background was both for artistic reasons and both for the reasons so it wouldn't fight in the composition for the contrast that the character has with the snow. So if I'll turn back to the previous bad composition, bad contrast composition, you can see a lot of it's going on here, and the first place my eyes go to is the darkness, which is something I really don't want to for my viewers to do, for the people to enjoy the artwork to do. I want them to look at the composition for the eye catchers here, and sadly the eye catchers don't work for multiple reasons. I'm going to do a big breakdown here later on this specific artwork, but pretty much the contrast between everything is just so strong that it doesn't work. This is a very extreme example of overdo your contrast. When you don't do your contrast enough, some of your works can be, very confusing. People will not find the point of interest you want them to find, the eye catcher. So it's really important to apply your contrast to the artwork. So, for example, if you make group photos, like you try to make multiple eye catchers into one frame, you need to bunch them together, make them the ladder in the big composition, so we can see that those are the eye catchers, that the contrast between them and the environment is going to be in favor to those eye catchers and not just to the surrounding area. You need to have them up on top the hierarchy scale, and contrast is going to help you a lot with it. The next thing we're going to talk about is going to be parallel lines. Now, it is one of the rules that I sometimes use in order to create a good composition, but you got to know that this specific rule I don't use all the time in my artworks because I would say the composition itself doesn't allow it, or I like myself to the terrain that I'm working on. For example, Maz here on the right side on the road, and the lines themselves right here, the end of the road, the pavement here, and the Kamaz itself, they're all towards the same area. They're all towards the same line. You can even say the same about those I would say building outlines. The only one that is kind of out of the ordinary here from the cubic shapes and the parallel lines that go between those things is going to be this little dome right here. There is another rule from previously that comes into play here, which is the rule of thirds. So for example, if I go here and I'll tilt my camera just a little bit here, see that if I like that, move it just a bit, you can see the rule of thirds come into play extremely well. I got a third here, I got a third here, and I got a third here. Now this is a little bit of a wide picture, so the rule of thirds can be stretched a bit. Over here on the right side, it's, the film overlay that you can use. This is a grid film overlay. This is the one you can, when you get into the editor and you want to get yourself working with the rule of thirds well, you can pretty much use it. So for example, I'm going to do it like this, and look at this absolutely perfect composition. We have the road here with a Kamaz on top of it, pretty much I would say the part that has the most details. You have the middle, which is pretty empty, and the left side, which is still kind of, but you can see there's a little bit of details. My four eyes go into those corners. Now, if I wanted to put my point of interest over here, I would put my point of interest either here on this little I would say a point, intersection point, or here up at the top. This Kamaz over here is just to show you some sort of interest point or something. You can rotate it a little bit and bend the rule of parallel lines because you have enough of them in this composition. But this is pretty much to show you what parallel lines are and how they can elevate your composition to work better. The next topic I'm going to talk about, and this one is going to be some sort of a closing topic for our little composition lesson today, is going to be how you angle and put your camera in ways that are going certain emotions, let me see, that are going to convey certain emotions or things that you really through the composition into the mind of the viewer. So for example, if you want some sort of a dramatic shot, sometimes altering your environment to be darker and have one single source of light, as you can see right here in this picture that I got in front of you, which is an iPhone background, by the way. I've done it, just to make it a little bit dramatic. You can utilize lighting to your advantage. But what I'm going to talk about here is going to be camera positions according to the composition. So as you can see right now, we have a little bit of a view over a street. Now, obviously, this is not, the best composition in the world. I mean, if I put something here, it needs to be really eye-catchy in order for me to immediately stave and look at it. So if I put a Kamaz here, it's still not enough, but it's between those two lines, those two intersection lines, and I can see this is points. But if I want to, for example, and this is the first one I'm going to show you, of authority. What I like the point of authority is really a character that's going to be in the composition, and it's going to be kind of controlling. That's what I put it as. So it's something that I'm not going to be using it as I would say a background or something. I'm going to put it right in the middle of that third. So there's 1/3, 2/3, third, I guess. So I'm going to put it straight in the middle, and it's going to be very authoritative. So if I'm going to put it like this, it's not very, it takes the eye. It's very eye catchy, but it's not something, something special. But if I want to, take one character and makes it very dramatic, I could go like this, go middle, put it out there. I'm going to, not using camera right now, so yeah. Put it out there, put it out with the thirds. All the points of interest are going to point us at this one Kamaz. This is the drama, I like to call it. This is like the point of interest in this picture. You can also do the same from different angles, which, hey, look, I created a really awesome poster or artwork that I can just, immediately hire a screenshot, boom, saved. And that's pretty much it. That's like authority. When you want to take something in an authoritative manner, you take it from the bottom, so like you're looking up towards it, and you take it when the center of the frame is him. Everything in the center is going to be that command. So if I do this, it looks alright, but it still doesn't quite fit. If I do this, it looks fine. Still, doesn't quite fit. It's good for a screensaver, though, when you want to have a little bit of a space here to save it. But, as you can see, it's half and half. So there's this grid that it fits pretty well. But still, I wouldn't call that a really good one. I just, if you want to take an authoritative picture that has authority in it, you will need to put the entire thing into perspective, which is pretty cool. For screensavers, the best thing you want to really perspective onto going to be using the rule of thirds, this ratio, which you're going to be using a 1/3 to really have the whole clutterness of that picture, and then the 2 other thirds to be semi-empty, just to make the composition look a little bit more breathable. You can use that as a screensaver, for example. It still works. I just think that personal preference for me is that if you use 2/3 here of that composition, your eyes would just immediately go to the left to where the light comes from. I might be wrong here again. Take everything with a grain of salt, just like I told you in the beginning. So just, in my opinion, I just think that taking pictures like these is, it's nice and all, but the rule of thirds really is the king of all for me. This is, my opinion on it. Okay, so I just want to give you a little bonus. If you guys use Photoshop, I think it could really help you enhance your works in the best way possible. So if you don't, try and download it, look some tutorials. I'm going to show you one necessary thing that I think you should use if you're using Photoshop to enhance your pictures is going to be motion. So for example, you see the main point of interest here is the helicopter being shot by this tandem. So the helicopter is the point of interest. It is having the best contrast with the background. The background is very bright, the helicopter is black, so obviously the best contrast it is. But I want to add some motion. For now, it's frozen in the air. Only the little spin blades look like they're moving, but that doesn't really make it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press on the layer, duplicate it. Sorry, I just pressed on the wrong button right there. What I'm going to do, I'm going to duplicate it, and what's going to happen is I'm going to right click again and convert to smart object. What this is going to be allowing me to add changes to that layer with a possibility for me to disable in the future. So if there's something that I didn't really like in my edit, I can go ahead and delete it later. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to blur and then go for motion blur. What this does, as you can see, it makes it kind of motion. So I'm going to have it a little bit, a little bit more like this. What's going to happen, I'm going to take this layer, move it downwards under the main layer. I'm going to add a mask over here, make sure that I'm standing on that mask. Take a brush. What I like to do is I like to take one of those soft round brushes so I can have a lot to play with. And then what I can do is pretty much apply the blur, paint the areas that I want the blur to be a part of. So if I want the helicopter to move extremely fast and I want this thing to move extremely fast, this is what I now please note that right now in the composition, this is actually very hard to look at because what we've done is that we made it so blurrish that it's no longer the point of interest. So it will require a lot more work, in my opinion. What I like to do is I like to make the background all blurry, everything that isn't supposed to be in focus more blurry. You can search up tutorials about how to do that in YouTube. Obviously, the motion blur is not going to cut it really that well. You can use field blur, but again, YouTube is your friend for this because I'm not doing a Photoshop tutorial. This is a little bit of a bonus to show you how you can utilize motion blur and general blur to fit in your composition the best way possible.
Thank you very much for watching, guys. I was Bear. I'd like to thank Suxol for providing me with one of the artworks that I used here just to show you a little bit about the composition. I'd also like to thank all the amazing people in the Squad Cinematics Discord. I'm going to leave a link down below to it. If you want to learn more, I'd really recommend you to go into my first tutorials. This is pretty much a composition suggestion video. It's a little bit of tips for me, I can say. This is going to be pretty much it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next tutorial. Have a good one.